Welcome to a short video on PPE in hyper demand marketplace. Essentially, we're talking about a global demand on pretty much one country, and Australia joined a little bit later. And I'm going to describe what a supply chain is for the hospital marketplace, and also why we're having the situations we are with shortages of supply, particularly some of the countries overseas are having it at the moment, and how the actual ordering occurs, because it's very different to normal marketplaces. And in general, the frustration that's been occurring for hospital management and administration is that they're not buying product. They've always bought product. Well, there's no product to buy, and I'll describe that. What they're doing is buying manufacturing, and there's a whole other way of doing that when every country in the world is going to one place for the manufacturing. I'm now going to describe just the supply chain and the different elements of the supply chain in normal ordering. Down the bottom left, you'll see firstly the clinicians there. They're the people we're trying to support. They're the ones we're wanting to keep safe, as well as any frontline staff who are potentially exposed to COVID. The bottom left is where the nurses normally go and staff normally go for stocks, and as you can see, not much there, and they pretty much run out fairly quickly. But normally what they do on a day-to-day basis is they'll go to that storage, and then when it gets low or if it runs out, they top it up daily. So they'll place orders on their hospital store, and you'll see above the main warehouse there's a small warehouse situation where that's the hospital warehouse, and there's not much in there, and it can't store more than a couple of days of stock or a half a week of stock. And the hospital stores usually will top up the departments and wards, and then they'll order on the big central distribution you'll see down below. A lot of OECD countries now using the retail modelling for logistics, and they use these major central warehouses for all their supplies into their various hospitals. And so what happens is that those distribution centres will top up the hospital stores and then order on the supplier, and it's usually min-max type ordering, and they'll order, as you'll see there next to it, a major warehouse. And that's in Australia, that's agencies and distributors, as well as multinationals. Multinationals themselves in Australia act as distributors, and what the local supplier will do will be doing their normal stock holdings. They'll be filling the orders to the distribution centres and then topping up by ordering on the manufacturer. And of course, next to it we see the air and sea freight that is the normal logistics. And of course, air freight, small storage, fast, very expensive, and then the mass movement of the sea freight. Then of course is the manufacturers, and we'll be describing that in a minute, but totally different behaviour that's going on now. But normally the manufacturer will just simply get a PO from the local supplier and either make to order or have it already in their storage. More often than not, they don't have storage, and they will be actually just making to order. Usual lead time is 2 weeks to the 3 months plus. Very briefly, the stock levels in a hyper demand situation. We've already discussed what occurs in the supply chain. Of course, down at the ward level, they run out very, very quickly. They've been calling on their hospital stores for stock, who then call on their distribution centres, and the hospital stores very quickly run out. Distribution centre thereafter. Of course, they've been calling on their local suppliers for quite a while by this time for stocks, and the local suppliers, of course, run out of stock in their warehouse, as well as booking up anything that's actually already in transit from the manufacturer. So what you find is they sell out, and air and sea freight gets fully booked. Back at the manufacturer, of course, with COVID, Australia came in later, so there's already been a big draw on the manufacturers. There will be no stock there. It's all made to order. So the manufacturers then are fully booked, and the entire supply chain has no stock. There is no product, as I mentioned before. And with regards to lead time, you can throw that out the door, because this is a totally different marketplace now. So let's talk about ordering in a hyper demand situation, and I'll just go straight into the manufacturing end. There's a global bidding to produce. So you've got every country trying to go to the manufacturers, mainly in China. They build orders into the future. Runs are always planned. So what happens is that the supplier will come in with a volume, and the manufacturer will do a quote. That quote will only be open for a 24-hour period, if that. There's usually money up front required, and you've got a short period of time to confirm and commit. So the local supplier will then get the commitment. If you're too slow to commit, then what happens is that other countries will get in ahead of you, and you could end up being weeks, even months behind at the manufacturing end. And that is one thing in the early days that created a lot of problems. The local supplier does the bidding for the manufacturing. As I said, it's global. They're bidding against other countries. They need a fast response from the hospital administration. The reason being is that they're not going to put themselves out for the volumes unless the hospitals really can afford to be able to do it. It requires financial backing because we're talking major volumes. We're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars for some of the procurement. Hospital administration, they've never had to do this before. It was a really frustrating time for them. The suppliers were coming to them saying, you know, based on your volumes, this is the cost. You'll need to put 100% up front or 50% up front, depending on what it is, and you need to give us an answer now. And we need to get on to the manufacturer, or you're going to go backwards in the manufacturing. And that's exactly what happened. Right now, it's a lot better. Australia's got massive amount of bookings already up in China, and it's occurring. But in the initial days, it was difficult. Of course, the one thing we had to keep saying to them when they were asking us about buying product is that they're actually not buying product. They're actually buying the manufacturing to make the future product. And that was the frustrating thing in the early days of changing that mindset. And of course, down at the department level, those frontline staff, they were desperate for the stocks. The other side of it is some of the changes. And that created a shipping to the hospital. So there's cross-docking all the way through the local supplier and the hospital administration, or as far as the distribution centres go, in that everything was just simply dropped straight through onto trucks and going to the next level as fast as we could down to the departments. Some of the other factors as well is that the bidding war amongst various country suppliers at manufacturing. So, you know, sometimes there was Dutch auctions, as we call them, type setups where people are literally just raising their price just to try and get ahead of others. There was unplanned raw material cost escalation because there's a massive demand on raw materials. Manufacturing company policy changes. So those in manufacturing, we've seen that in the US, we've seen it in China. Sometimes they were creating policies which would protect their own country. Local country policy changes as well, so changes as far as within Australia and the local requirements. Price gouging, local, we've all seen that in the media lately, and I'll just leave that there. Supply chain COVID interruptions. So what I'm saying there is that interruptions caused by COVID. So are there plan Bs? So do they have adequate air freight for urgent initial orders? Are there any disruptions to the transport itinerary and directions? Can the stock be intercepted by others with less ethics whilst en route? And that's also an issue, and you might have read about some of that in the media as well. And do you have customs expediting ability? Now, Australia's pretty good, and customs is very quick. So, bidding in hyper demand. So I'm going to talk about the bidding, and then I'm going to talk about the lead times as well in this same graph. Let's just say that the manufacturer is already booked for 2 weeks. That's not going to change. You'll see down along the bottom there that I've got different situations. One, existing bookings, one's hours on hold, others getting ahead, and then when we book after the others. So I'm preempting some of the story for you. So if all good, we get the confirmation from hospital administration, we book it, it's booked in. Our manufacturing is from 2 to 4 weeks. That's before they even start shipping it. Then you've got the air freight and the sea freight. Now, air freight can be 1.5 weeks, can be 2 weeks. But then you've got from the airport and cross docking all the way through to the ward, that could be another 1.5 weeks. So even at best, people are going to be 7.5 weeks. Let's just say it's blisteringly quick, it's 6.5 weeks away. You're still talking about a month and a half at best. But really, more realistically, you're talking about 7.5 weeks or so to get the stock in by air freight. Then if it's sea freight, it could be up to 9.5 to 10 weeks. I mean, and it all depends on the sea freight too. So when it gets into Australia, it needs to go through customs, which is usually fairly quick, then across the docks and the freight. So that's the at best. But what happened quite often was that the administrations weren't used to the booking process for manufacturing. And so what's happened is you would miss out on some bidding, and you couldn't get the confirmation in, and therefore the business goes to someone else. So it goes to other countries. So other countries might have about 4 weeks of bookings that you might have missed out on. So then basically what you do is you just simply add on your booking and the air freight and the sea freight, and then deliveries when it does reach Australia, and you could be looking 11.5 to 13.5 weeks from today through to when the stock might come in. Now, there's a lot of bookings that have already been made. There's some good news there, but that's the issue that we've got. You're talking about a big increase in time if the administration aren't fast enough. I hope this presentation just shone a bit of a light as to what happens in the PPE supply chain.